There's a pigment that costs $3 at any hardware store, has been documented as the most historically significant color discovery in the last 300 years, and was found by complete accident in a Berlin workshop in 1704 by a dye maker who was trying to make something else entirely. A pigment so significant that it changed the course of European painting, gave Japanese woodblock printing its most iconic color, dressed the armies of Napoleon, and was formally approved by the United States Food and Drug Administration as a medical treatment for heavy metal toxicity, all from a compound that any person can purchase today at a hardware store for the price of a cup of coffee, and that the $200 billion art supply industry sells in premium artist-grade tubes at prices 30 to 50 times higher than the identical chemical compound available in any paint department. Prussian blue, the first synthetic pigment ever created, the color that made the deep, saturated blues of 18th and 19th century European painting possible at a time when the only alternative was ultramarine ground from lapis lazuli that cost more per gram than gold, and the compound that modern medicine uses to treat patients who have absorbed thallium or radioactive cesium because its crystalline structure traps heavy metal ions with an efficiency that no pharmaceutical alternative has matched. Welcome to this channel. Subscribe and hit the bell. This is where we share the knowledge that the art supply industry and the pharmaceutical industry would both prefer to keep in separate conversations where the price difference stays invisible. Let me take you back to where this all begins. The year is 1704 in Berlin, Germany, and a color maker named Johann Jakob Diesbach is working in his workshop attempting to produce a red lake pigment using potash, potassium carbonate that he has borrowed from an alchemist, colleague named Johann Conrad Dippel. The potash has been contaminated with animal-derived compounds from Dippel's experiments, and when Diesbach combines it with his iron sulfate and cochineal in the standard red lake preparation, something entirely unexpected happens. Instead of the red pigment he was producing, the reaction produces a deep, intense blue, a color unlike anything Diesbach had seen produced from chemical synthesis before. Diesbach does not immediately understand why the reaction went wrong or why it produced what it did. What he understands is that the color is extraordinary. A deep, rich, stable blue with a tinting strength that natural blue pigments of the period could not approach at any price. He names it Berliner Blau, Berlin Blue, and begins producing it commercially. Subscribe and share. Every video we publish uncovers the accidental discoveries that changed history and the industries that built fortunes around them.
Here's exactly why it works, and why the same chemistry that makes Prussian blue the most historically important. Synthetic pigment also makes it a medically approved treatment for specific types of heavy metal exposure. Prussian blue is chemically iron hexocyanaphrate, a coordination compound in which iron atoms are connected through cyanide bridges into a three-dimensional crystalline lattice with a specific geometry that gives the material to completely different but equally remarkable properties. The first is its optical property. The iron atoms in the Prussian blue lattice exist in two different oxidation states connected through the cyanide bridge. When light hits the material, electrons transfer between these iron centers in a process called intervalence charge transfer that absorbs light in the red and yellow region of the visible spectrum, producing the deep blue color that made the pigment so valuable when Diesbach first produced it. The resulting blue is stable, resistant to light fading, resistant to heat, and resistant to chemical degradation that made many natural blue pigments of the period unreliable for permanent works. The second property is its ion-trapping capacity. The same crystalline lattice structure that produces the optical charge transfer also contains channel spaces of precisely the right dimensions to trap monovalent cations of specific sizes, including thallium and radioactive cesium. Study PUSH in radiation protection dosimetry documented the efficiency of Prussian blue in binding cesium ions in the gastrointestinal tract. The FDA approved oral Prussian blue as a medical treatment in 2003. Here's where the story gets interesting. The global art supply market generates over $200 billion annually across professional and consumer segments, with pigments and paints representing a significant portion of that revenue. The pricing structure of the artist-grade art supply market is built on a combination of genuine cost factors. Some historic pigments, like cadmium and cobalt, genuinely require expensive raw materials and commercial positioning that is built. Premium price expectations around materials whose actual production costs do not justify the retail prices charged. Prussian blue sits in a peculiar position in this pricing structure. The pigment is chemically simple. It can be produced from iron salts and potassium ferrocyanide through a straightforward precipitation reaction that requires no exotic materials. The industrial-grade compound is produced at commodity scale and sold in bulk for applications ranging from paint tinting to laundry bluing to electronics, manufacturing at prices per gram that make artist tube pricing appear as a significant markup. The identical chemical compound is sold in hardware stores as a component of certain staining and tinting products at a fraction of the cost of artist-grade Prussian blue. The art supply industry has built a successful commercial structure around positioning artist-grade pigments as technically superior to their industrial equivalents through marketing language. It's about particle size and light phosphorus that contains genuine technical content, but whose practical significance for most applications is considerably smaller than the price difference suggests. The knowledge never fully disappeared. The scientific and historical documentation of Prussian blue's discovery, chemistry, and applications is more thoroughly documented than almost any other pigment in the history of art materials. Precisely because its accidental discovery in 1704 and its rapid adoption across European painting, textile, and applications made it a subject of continuous scientific and historical attention. A story of Prussian blue appears in every serious history of color and pigment, including Philip Ball's Bright Earth and Victoria Finlay's Color, A Natural History of the Palette, both of which document the compound's discovery and cultural significance in terms accessible to general readers. The FDA approval of Prussian blue as a medical treatment in 2003 produced a significant body of publicly accessible documentation about the compound's properties. For artists and makers working with natural and synthetic pigments, Prussian blue remains one of the most reliable and cost-effective blue pigments available. The pigment is compatible with oil, acrylic, watercolor, and tempera binders, and produces deep, transparent blue glazes with exceptional tinting strength. A small amount goes a very long way, which makes the cost advantage over artist tube alternatives even more significant in practice. Iron-based blue pigments, including Prussian blue, are available from pigment suppliers who sell directly to artists in bulk quantities at prices that reflect actual production costs rather than art supply retail positioning, and from hardware paint departments in tinting pigment form at comparable cost. A dye maker in Berlin in 1704 reached 4 contaminated potash in his workshop and accidentally produced the color that would change European painting, dress the armies of an empire, inspire the most iconic image in Japanese woodblock printing, and eventually be approved as a treatment for heavy metal toxicity, all from a single, unexpected reaction between borrowed chemicals in a workshop experiment that went wrong in the most consequential way in the history of color. Johann Jacob Diesbach did not set out to discover the first synthetic pigment. He set out to make a red lake. What he made instead was a compound whose chemistry was so fundamental and so multifaceted that 3 centuries of scientific investigation have still not exhausted its applications. The art supply industry that grew around the commercial production of Prussian blue understood from the beginning that the pigment's value to artists was not primarily a function of its production cost. The chemistry was always simple enough that production costs remained low, but of its visual performance in the studio and on the canvas. That genuine performance value justified genuine price premiums in the early commercial art supply market. What it does not justify is the continued pricing structure. That positions a commodity industrial chemical as a premium artist material at multiples of its actual production cost. When that same chemical compound is available in every hardware store paint department at a price that reflects what the material actually costs to produce, subscribe and share this video.